All right, we'll get started when my computer says it's 10 o'clock on the dot. Everybody excited? I see we got 89 people here. Go ahead and type something in the chat. Let us know you're alive.
The bar is so low. All you want is for people to be alive? How about
Yeah.
stage,
Yeah.
investment?
And then we'll move over to civil. We'll get there. All right. It's 10 o'clock. I'm so excited for this webinar. And before I even jump in, I went to my PO box yesterday and picked up the SHRM magazine, which is all about civility at work. SHRM Civility Index reveals more than half of US workers deem society uncivil. And the letter from the CEO of SHRM, I'm going to read what he says. Regardless of personal political leanings, every worker should be able to come to work and be productive without fear of encountering hostility for their personal beliefs. This also means every coworker should be able to come to work without spouting hostility, without shoving their opinions down the throats of coworkers who are just trying to do their jobs. So we couldn't be more timely on this webinar, Bob. We're going to try to shove civility down your throat today, though. My name is Catherine Mattice. I am the founder and CEO of Civility Partners. And Civility Partners has been in business for about 15 years. I started Civility Partners out of being in a toxic work environment. I was director of HR and decided this was not working for me. And I saw all of the damage that this kind of environment was causing, me personally and other people personally. And then also, the cost of the organization with turnover and lots of time kind of counseling people and trying to help them. So it was just a great experience for me to dive into the world of toxic environments. And I ended up getting my master's degree and doing all of my graduate research on workplace bullying, toxic environments. I've since written 3 books, the first of which was Back Off. Ken Blanchard wrote the foreword, so that was kind of fun, little horn toot there. And so today I have one of my colleagues with me, Bob. Bob, I'll let you introduce yourself. Bob is kind of new to the Civility Partners team. We have been getting a lot of requests to resolve conflict for clients, so we've been working with Bob on that. So Bob, say hi, introduce yourself.
Isn't it interesting how like something that's so good, like Civility Partners, comes from something that was rotten at its core, a poor work environment? And I think what's so great about this webinar is like you created Civility Partners as a reaction to something. Mm-hmm. And this webinar is really about being proactive and thinking through like, how do we think about the future? I know you didn't ask me to say that, so I'll just introduce myself. Hi, everybody. It's really an honor to be here. I love engaging in this topic because I feel like from one person can a difference make. And that's really what this is about. How do we make a difference for ourselves, our coworkers, the people we lead, and the people who lead us in the workplace? So a little bit about me. I love this work, not because I love conflict. Actually, I'm pretty conflict averse, but I love it because I think when you follow a process and you use skills and you take what you see from the research on how we resolve conflict, things work. And then all of a sudden, people who weren't relating so well together now can. And I don't say that with idealism or in a Pollyannish way. I say that from somebody who's done this and just has a lot of realistic expectations about the good that can come from hard work. Back to you, Catherine.
I love that. Thank you. And I also want to shout out to everyone in the chat. I love that everyone is sharing where they are tuning in from. So keep the chat coming. We really want this to be interactive. We're not here to yammer on at you. Q&A is not at the end. It's all throughout. So please do chat with us all throughout the webinar. We definitely want to hear from you. So just to share a little bit more about Civility Partners before we jump in, Civility Partners is focused on 4 main things. One is doing climate assessments or workforce surveys where we're measuring culture, where our constructs are engagement, job satisfaction, relationships, psychological safety, leadership, and trust in leadership. So we're really wanting to understand the full company culture, not just engagement, for example. And then once we have that data, we love to work with clients to figure out what to do with the data and create action plans for change and implement those changes. So that's really rewarding work to shift culture like that. We, of course, do lots of training programs, such as one around conflict and having respectful conversations. And then we also specialize in coaching for leaders who are essentially accused of bullying or creating a hostile work environment. We have had over the last 15 years the pleasure of serving all sorts of fun industries and clients everywhere from NASA and Chevron to the ACLU to Best Western to insurance, and just it's been a cool ride so far these 15 years, and we got another at least 15 years ahead of us, if not more. And I've also had the pleasure of being cited in a lot of cool places. Not this magazine though, so somebody's going to get a harshly worded letter over it. Sure, just kidding. They wrote about workplace bullying and they didn't call me. I'm a little offended. Today we're going to talk about a variety of things. This isn't necessarily an agenda. This is just sort of everything we want to make sure we cover today. We'll talk a little bit about kind of you as an individual and how you can influence conversations in a positive way. And of course, we'll talk about you as an organizational leader, as the organization representative, and things that you can be doing to help be proactive and try to keep this upcoming election season as civil as possible. So just to share a bit of research before we dive in, 61% of workers have engaged in political discussions at work. So this isn't, I think sometimes we might think, you know, why people aren't talking about politics, they know better, but that's a big number, 61%. 51% of workers believe workplace political discussions hurt the work environment. 64% of workers said they feel supported when their company takes a stance on political issues they care about. Now that can be tricky, right? Something like, unfortunately, Black Lives Matter, unfortunately, is a very political size, polarizing type of a scenario. So companies taking a real big stance on something like that run the risk of, you know, having people leave or not want to apply. So things that employers have to think about. 25% have left or wanted to leave their jobs because of their manager's political beliefs. A couple more research studies here. 24% of US workers experienced bias based on their political affiliation. And this is a bigger number than since 2019. 13% have experienced a reduction in their promotion opportunities based on political beliefs. Yikes. 20% of workers were mistreated based on their political views. So this is a very real problem. I guess in addition to the SHRM research study, this study, a big majority, 85%, said civility in today's society is worse than it was 10 years ago. I wonder if you all agree with that. Give us a yay or a nay in the chat. Do you feel like since 10 years ago, civility's gotten better or worse? Yeah, looks like everybody's agreeing. Yeah, interesting. I think we've had a lot of things happen over the last 10 years that create the opportunity for incivility, like very polarizing political discussions, COVID, which unfortunately became politicized. Internet makes it easy to be uncivil to others, right? Because you don't necessarily see the person on the other end or think about them. We have a lot of work to do. And then I guess to my point, social media seems to be something that everybody agrees is eroding our civility. It's so easy to get after people on Facebook or something, right? Let's see, in person is the only way to have a reasonable conversation. I would agree with you. So I don't want to offend anybody, but I just, to make a point here, some of the types of things, you know, it's so easy to see something online that you agree with and post it and share it. You don't even have to think about it, right? You just see like this little meme here and, oh, I agree with that, and post it, or I disagree with that, and then you post it and you attack it. You know, just so easy to share. And that is unfortunate. I've also read some research that social media is increasing narcissism, because if you know, post a picture of you and your kids getting ice cream and then people are liking it, all of a sudden you think people care that you're getting ice cream, and that can increase some narcissism or self-centeredness, just like you know, Kim Kardashian got bangs and it's got a bazillion views. I got ice cream. it's everybody's liking it. So some things to keep in mind with social media, right, is that social media is meant to increase viewership. It's feeding you things that you like. The longer you stop on a post and read it, the more the algorithm says, oh, Catherine wants more information about this kind of a topic, so we're going to feed her more. If you share something, you send it to somebody. So your behavior is certainly being monitored by those algorithms. And then the more you say things about a topic, the more it's going to feed you that information. And so that's unfortunate, because then we're just not getting information from both sides. We get real focused on our own ideas, right? So tip number one, check your policies. We'll start there with the kind of HR compliance portion of this webinar. You know, there's a free speech balance here that you have to have. You also cannot prohibit protected speech. So, you know, an employee is posting something about a candidate who plans to increase minimum wage or do something with wages, you know, that's protected speech. So you can't keep people from posting things like that. And you are required, though, to protect your workforce from harassment and discrimination. So all the more important to be in a webinar like this and take some of our action items, because you can't have a blanket "don't talk about politics" statement. You have to give people space to have civil conversations without harassing each other. They have to be respectful. So a couple thoughts on how to do that. Let's see, James has a comment. The broader tenor of discourse is worse in big part due to algorithms profiting off of rage, failure of leadership, COVID. Yeah. One thing I think is positive is that marginalized voices have never been more prominent and recognized. There's a lot of pushback from the queer and trans visibility, more diversity in media. It's ultimately a sign of progress. That's a great point, James. I appreciate that. That while there's a lot of pushing us into being polarized, there's also a lot of really great things that are coming out. Yes, I'm hearing some questions. Will people get a copy of the webinar? Yes, we will send you a recording, not to worry. So some tips just kind of from the compliance HR hat place, right? Ask people to think about the risks and rewards for connecting on social media and posting very polarized views. So considering that we do become friends with the people we work with, and we do, you know, like their things on Facebook and things like that, be thinking about having conversations around just, hey, think of the responsibility you take on if you're posting things and you're friends with your coworkers. Something else you can use to get people thinking, and these are great kind of talking points for a staff meeting, even, you know, talking about personal brand. So do you really want to post something that's pretty polarizing that'll sit there forever, that people can find? Just like I remember way back when I was internal HR and social media was just coming up, and having conversations with my college students that I was teaching to, like, do you really want to post yourself being, you know, double fisted at a party or doing a keg stand? Is that going to keep you from getting a job? Maybe. Is that fair? I don't know, but something to think about. You know, something else that we all know about social media is the fake news, the false news. I saw some research once that some, you know, don't quote me, but like 80% of people say they get their news from Facebook or something. Well, if we're getting algorithms sending us specific information, then it's not unbiased news. So challenging your coworkers and your team to say, before you just share something because it's easy and you're sitting in bed with a glass of wine right before you go to bed, you might want to do some research first and then post. That way you can actually have a discussion about something rather than just sharing. And then, of course, leaning on your employment law attorney to review all of your relevant policies. Any thoughts, Bob? I know you've kind of reacted here and there with your facial expressions as I've been talking. I feel like you have some stuff to add.
You know, the facial leakage thing for me, I think it just comes through. I think for me, I wind up going right back to the conversation about like, do we have this conversation about politics in the workplace? And there might be a legal answer, and there's probably also a policy answer, and then there's also kind of a realistic answer. And so even in places where you're strongly suggesting to people, like we're going to not have these conversations, it's still important to give people the tools because they're going to engage. And then there are other workplaces who want people to engage, but even those who don't, like the tools are still so important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think too, if a lot of organizations are really wanting to talk about being inclusive and they have their DEIB programs, can you have a core value or initiatives around DEIB and then have a blanket policy that you're not allowed to talk about politics? Probably not, right? So the whole point of DEIB is that we are able to have conversations about all sorts of things, not just politics. And so something to consider. Let's see, Stephanie says, I recall there being a lot of complaints of intolerance and harassment into HR due to COVID, DEIB. White males in Texas, for example, felt discriminated against. What is your take on the balance between honoring the DEI human-centered policies around respect and inclusion for all? That's a really great question, and I'm going to answer it. And then I know Bob will have some of his own ideas. As an organization, you get to decide what kind of culture you want to have. Otherwise, you have a culture, whether you decide to have that culture or not. And just like you could say, anybody could say, well, I like to be a bully. Sorry, that's just how I am. Or I like to joke at people's expense. I'm sarcastic. That's just how I am. You get to say, no, that, we have policies and rules around how we're going to behave, and that's not acceptable. So I would say there's a lot of work that has to go into getting the buy-in. I'm not saying like, we have a DEIB policy, and if you don't like it, get out, so you do need to nurture those conversations and help those individuals understand why you're doing it. And it's about education. And that's why you can't just do, a training on DEIB or unconscious bias and then check mark, we're done. It's a delicate process. And with any kind of a culture, it takes a while to make a change. So you're not going to turn those people around tomorrow or even this year. But the more you help them get educated and understand the value of this, the more you'll be able to get to them and get their buy-in. And then ultimately, 3 years from now, if they're still not on the train of change, maybe you let them go. So that's my answer. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I see one of my colleagues, Daniel, is on this webinar. It goes back to something that he and I talk about a lot, is this idea, these policies, the DEIB policies, for many, those policies are interpreted as incredible support. And they're so happy to see those sorts of policies show up. And for some, they don't interpret them in the same lens. And I think, though, when we think about how we support people and make sure everybody's voice is included, it's something that, like you said, Catherine, it's I do it today, I do it tomorrow, and I do it the next day. And over time, we see it. And part of that support is balancing. Like, it's not just, here are the policies, go ahead and speak. It's, here are the policies we're going to share. And also, when somebody says something that doesn't fit, there's the accountability piece to it also. And so when we do these efforts, we have to be conscious as leaders in thinking through both the support and the accountability so that we're creating an environment that actually is living the value of including voices in a kind way and respectful way.
Yeah, I love that. I'll add to something I've talked a lot about over the years where I don't know if where HR needs to really focus on building a partnership with the workforce so that you can, sometimes there is the one by one scenario. I remember during COVID, one of our clients was allergic to the COVID vaccination. He got it one time and had a major allergic reaction, so he couldn't get the booster. And then, of course, there were these rules that you had to have, I think, both shots before you could come back to work. Now he feels excluded. It's not his fault. He's allergic to it. He would like to have had the second one. How do we work with him? Well, he can't just come in the office and, breathe on everybody. So, but because we had a good relationship with the employees, we are able to work through that. So it's really important for HR to create environments that are inclusive and civil and where people can be vulnerable and talk to you about what they need or why they think a certain way, versus HR being the, I know we get this kind of naysayer, reputation that we're just all about compliance and policies, and we gotta move from that. Mary, it looks like you raised your hand. Feel free to just chat put your question or comment in the chat and we'll grab it. Okay. Moving on. Oh, I see some other laws created in the 60s with the goal to improve and balancing the field has now somehow been spin doctored to benefit those who were the primary reason the laws were created. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on out there. So one suggestion, I found a couple of these ideas, is to create, a little cheat sheet for people. I love this one to the right, the social media etiquette, where it's kind of a series of questions. Is this all about me? Am I spamming things? Am I ranting? So just, am I being respectful? So this is a great, little checklist that you could share, something like this, with your team to say, here's some things to answer before you go ahead and hit post or share. So I liked the idea of doing something like that as a tip. Okay. Second tip, provide training to your managers for diffusing political conversations. I'm going to give you a couple of things that we have here when we're doing trainings like this, and then Bob's going to give us some other tips around the training. So this is a self-assessment. It's a handout in one of our training workbooks. These are the types of things that you can be putting out there to your team. Again, do you have the skills to be inclusive? And then you can give people 5-question little assessment or a 10-question assessment, and then encourage managers to talk about it with their teams and have some open conversations about whether or not our team's being inclusive. You can give this to your managers and then develop some talking points around their own abilities to be inclusive. So, this is from our workbook. You don't need our training to have this. You can create something like this on your own, but I always find these kind of conversation pieces are a great way to kick off conversations like this around being respectful, so that everybody's got something to look at and talk about. We also have, and we will share this with you, we have a booklet that is 12 manager exercises, essentially. So you will get that at the end of this webinar. And this is one of the exercises in this booklet. So this booklet is meant to be something that managers can take, use one or all of the exercises, maybe do one a month. That's why there's 12. And this is just to give them some tools and tips so that they can continue conversations around things like compassion or civility or respect or word choice, I know is one of the things in there. So you'll get this at the end, but again, just encouraging managers to talk about the team culture and the company culture all the time. That is going to be a big key to shifting culture over time, because culture exists in those little nuanced conversations that we have. All right, so we got another question for you. Have you ever experienced conflict at work related to politics? You yourself. Would love to hear. Put it in the chat. Ever since 2020? Luckily, no. As HR, yeah, sometimes you get sucked in there. No, not conflict, but discomfort. I like the distinction there. Comments disguised as humor. I typically back off. I avoid these discussions. Just people who make assumptions based on what you listen to. Blue lives versus black lives, a certain radio station. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Former employer. The owners were extremely outspoken and constantly brought up the topic. The manager liked something political on LinkedIn and it was disappointing. He didn't realize the impact. Okay. We had an executive post in Slack, a long post in favor of his brother running for Congress. Not massive conflict, but a few wondering if that was appropriate. Yeah. Hey, employees, vote for my brother.
And here's $10 to do it.
Let's see. We had an employee who was involved in local politics when someone placed a mini noose in his work area. Goodness, Christy. I've actually, that's the third time I've heard of a noose in the 15 years that I've been doing this. It's pretty, pretty scary. Let's see. Anti-Mexican, Islamophobic stuff. Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like several of us have, not all of us have been lucky enough to have political conversations at work. But it does create some discomfort, as someone had mentioned, lots of microaggressions. So now I have a second question for you. What fears or anxieties do you have about stepping in to diffuse conflict, whether as an individual or as HR or a leader? Because stepping in can be pretty scary, right? So fearing making it worse, that you'll then be a target, physical violence, lose your job, retaliation, employee relations. Yeah, employee relations got to get involved if there's big things going. Your fear that you'll elevate the conflict versus diffusing it. In Uganda, it's okay, we discuss it all the time. Well, that's good. Fear, yeah, I like that. Fear of the unknown and mental health. Where'd that one go? And well-being of the other person and them reacting physically, how to address, not making it backfire. Yeah. How do you be an ally while trying to understand racist, homophobic comments? Well, I don't, Bob's probably better to answer that one. You don't maybe necessarily have to understand those racist or homophobic comments, but you've got to understand that the person saying them is a person, and that perhaps you have the ability to influence those perspectives. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think understanding and also the impact. And actually, when that comment popped up in the chat, my first instinct was to say, like, the real work starts, 2 years before, in like what you do as a team and how you create teams that are comfortable providing feedback to one another and actually wanting feedback. Because if you create a team environment that does that, then when you get to these harder conversations, there's much more of a natural flow, and you can have those conversations where you're calling people in a way that works.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. Okay, so yeah, stepping in is scary for a variety of reasons. So I'm gonna let you take over from here, Bob.
Sounds good. I am ready. The text in the top left corner of the slide around fear being the number one reason, and I feel like the question is why, and you all answered it, right? I'm afraid I'm going to make it worse because I don't have the skills, right? So those two are connected. And then two, like, I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble myself. Like, those are the big ones that I feel like we hear from people all the time on why don't we engage in these hard conversations, not just about why don't we engage in the high conflict conversations, but sometimes even why don't we step up when we need to be an ally, like somebody else said in the chat box. So thank you for that. I am very much swayed by the comment in the bottom right corner on this slide, which says, and this is all over. I mean, you can really go any Google search that you do around polarization, like this comes up, and which is, I think, really important for me to consider when I'm thinking about engaging in a conversation or when I'm thinking about judging somebody else for something they said, which is that we are really not as far out as we think we are. But because we think we are so far apart from one another, we are actually emotionally that far apart because it just means we just don't like each other. That research, I think, is really helpful to me. And on a personal note, perhaps not in the workplace, but on a personal note, when I have friends and I know that we are really engaged in different places, it makes me more willing to jump in and say, hey, I think for the purpose of our friendship, this will be better. And I have done that with work colleagues too. But I will say that I'm more comfortable, doing this with friends as far as maintaining the relationship goes. So I think that's food for thought. For me, it's a motivator. It's a motivator that says, like, I can connect, and also on the teams that I work with to help them, I can help them connect also. And I think that, Keith's comment about how we're so divided is also true. But both can be true at the same time, that we are absolutely divided, and perhaps not as much as we think. So as we jump to the next slide, I want to share a few things, like how do we help our team, right? And the first tip that we thought would be helpful is give each other the benefit of the doubt. We don't share this tip because, oh, hey, you've never thought about this, but we do share it because I want to tell a quick story that for a long time I was a school principal, and the whole first year of work, maybe even for my first 2 years as a school principal, I never asked, wow, how come the teachers aren't giving me the benefit of the doubt? I didn't even realize that I wasn't asking that. But once year 3 hit, all of a sudden I asked myself, gosh, what's going on this year? Like there's no benefit of the doubt. And I complained a lot about it. And then I started to think, okay, well, what am I doing different in my practice? Because like in the end, like I have to be reflective on my own behaviors. And I realized in year 1, I was like super communicator all the time, in person and emails, in classrooms, communicating all the time. So I didn't have to, I didn't need the benefit of the doubt because I was communicating so much. Maria agreed with your comment. I agree. But by year 3, I felt like, well, I'm established. I don't have to communicate as much. I'm not making up for the deficits of a prior leader. And instead, what I was actually doing is growing my own deficits. And so give each other the benefit of the doubt is actually a comment that I think we bring to leaders to say, are there practices that we can do so that we don't have to ask this question? The next one on here, seek to understand rather than be understood. For those of you who are Stephen Covey fans, I think he definitely popularized, this phrasing. And of course, like the reason it's become so popular is because it is so important. And in a little bit, we'll have a different slide where I'll go into a little more detail on kind of why there is such a benefit to doing this. But reminding ourselves and the teams we work on why this is so important, I think is something that we should do frequently as leaders. And then the last one I want to comment on this slide is just the one on the far right around successful political conversations where both parties feel heard. And how do we define feel heard? I'm inspired, although I'm not, I push back a little bit given today. I'm inspired by the research that Carl Rogers did many decades ago around active listening. And, he says 3 things around how people feel heard. One is you have to be genuine, right? Be genuine. 2 is unconditional positive regard. And 3 is empathy. Well, I can say with certainty that I'm really good at number 1 and number 3, at genuineness and with empathy. And that I struggle with this idea of unconditional positive regard. Not just struggle with like, can I do it, but also like, should I do it? And so in my mind, sometimes I rephrase that a little bit to like give as much positive regard as I can, and perhaps even a little bit more positive regard than I might think the person deserves. And that feels about my own behavior and really helpful.
I want to add something, Bob, because that third one, find common ground, kind of speaks to the slide before that. We're not actually all that far apart. And there's an exercise that I like to do with training where we essentially say, how do you want to be treated at work? And we'll, put people in Zoom rooms to spend a few minutes just writing a laundry list, all the things that they want. How do you want to be treated at work? Respectfully, I want to laugh sometimes. I want to feel valued and heard. All these different types of things. And that is a really great exercise because then when you bring everybody back and they're all sharing the answers they came up with, it's a really great way to highlight that it doesn't matter your age, race, gender, whatever. We all actually really want to be treated the same way. From there, though, then you have to say, well, if we're all saying we want to be treated with respect, what does that actually look like for each of us? And that's where there could be some variations. But it's a really great way to kind of like, no matter who you vote for or what your views are, we actually do want exactly the same things because we're both human. We both need the same things. So it's just a good starting point of like, hey, look, we both want respect. Now we just got to talk about what does that actually mean for each of us? Because that's where the variations happen.
Absolutely. How we define our values is so important, Catherine. Thanks for lifting that up. There are 2 comments in the chat box that I also want to look up. One is by Roya, who mentions that the benefit of the doubt is something that's that doesn't apply equally to all and provides a different amount of harm to different folks. And I think, Roya, that we always also connect to the idea of oh, well, let's try to think about the intent behind somebody's comment. And while I think it is absolutely important to think about the intent behind somebody's comment, it doesn't eliminate the impact of their comments. And so we have to be thoughtful about both. And I appreciate you lifting that up. And Marianne, your comment about how do you help a team that doesn't have good EQ, right? Well, call us, we'll help you, but on a more serious level, like how do you help a team that doesn't have good EQ? One of the most profound things I learned, maybe it's not so profound to you, but I thought it was amazing when I first learned it many years ago, is that whereas IQ is fixed, EQ is not. And so I think starting from a place like where my team might not have good EQ, but I actually can help them develop this, I think is really, that mindset I think is important. And you are so right about how difficult that is, especially when a team believes that they don't have common ground. So my first reaction, like if you said to me, Bob, come work with us and I'm only going to give you 2 hours, where would you start? And Catherine, I'd love to hear your comment about this too. Like, where would you start if you only had 2 hours? I would go back to workplace values and defining workplace values, really defining them, because respect to Catherine could mean that I provide all sorts of feedback because I'm engaging with her in a collaboration. And respect for me could mean, oh, I want total autonomy. Well, those are two separate definitions of respect. So Catherine, if you had only 2 hours to work with the team on EQ, where would you spend it?
I would just come in and fire no, I'm just kidding. I absolutely agree. Core values are such a missed opportunity with organizations. I just was at SHRM on Monday giving a presentation on this very topic, that all the ways in which we miss out on using core values, and they're not just meant to be on the website. They're meant to be something that is in every nook and cranny of the organization. So starting there, that's where that common ground can start, and then you can build from there. So I'm with you.
All right, we're gonna jump forward. Catherine, thanks for, I feel so supported. Thank you. So we don't include these warning signs of conflict because you haven't seen them before. We include the warning signs of conflict because they're a flashing light that says, I see these signs. How, as a leader, am I going to respond to these signs? And what am I going to do? That's the most important thing. And if I can be so bold, it's not a discussion that leaders should make, by themselves. This is a conversation with a group, the leadership team, or maybe everybody, right? Like if you see the signs, it doesn't mean act right away. It means being really thoughtful, engage in conversation, and then act. So as this next slide, I want to share one other bit of research that I think is so important. And that is that what we know is if I feel so strongly about something and Catherine does not, or she feels exactly the opposite way, if I go in and we have our monthly one-on-one with one another, and I go in and like, Catherine, we got to not talk about work. I really want to tell you about why you should be voting for so-and-so. First of all, probably not wise, right? But like for so many reasons. But if I tell her why she should be voting for so-and-so, what I am effectively doing is pouring some concrete where she's standing and fixing her to that position or moving her further away from me. If instead we go back to the Stephen Covey piece around seeking first to be curious, and I ask her to share why she's voting for whoever, right, in a really genuine, authentic way, and then eventually get to the place where maybe she'll be willing to listen to me, there is a higher chance that she will move a little bit toward me than if I go in a really strong and domineering way. That bit of research is so important, especially for those of us who really, really believe at our core that it's our job to talk somebody into believing something different. Well, how do we do that? How do we talk them into believing something different? We listen. All right, we're going to jump forward. And we want to share just a few things about, so what do you do with your workforce? How do you do this sort of work? So we want to provide 5 principles that feel important. And I want to just share a little bit about the first one, take winning off the table. I only halfway agree with this. What I prefer, and the mindset that I love to bring to teams is, let's leave winning on the table, but let's define it differently. There is absolutely a way for people, even at far ends of a conflict, to find a place where both can win. And if you think to me, if you're thinking, Bob, you're off your rocker, I'll accept that. And then I'll point back at you and to say, there are countless examples of people all over this country on opposite sides of the table working together on something. Pro-choice, pro-life, coming together to work for, prenatal care, or, like so many examples, or adoption, these sorts of pieces. So if it can happen in these hot button issues where people are so far apart, I think we can figure out a way to do this if we're really intent on trying. So we're going to flip on, just for the sake of time, as we move forward. I want to show you some language that, we like to think of, like, we believe that disagreement can be so helpful, right? But how we disagree matters. So we have a couple examples up there, like, this is a terrible idea. I have some concerns about that approach. So you see, like, how we're reframing language to allow for collaboration. I want to pause only for 20 seconds and ask you to do this. Choose one of the ones that are blank and type into the chat box how you might reframe it differently. So the ones that we're asking, there's no way that will work. That's not what I heard. I disagree completely. Let's do some of your reframes. And then in about 20 seconds, we're going to put up kind of how Catherine and I decided to reframe them, which doesn't mean we're the best. It just means it's an example that we want to show you.
There's no way this is going to work. No, I just kidding.
Oh. No, Catherine, you're wrong. Did I do that right? So,
okay, they're doing it. Love it.
It's great. So I really like the tell me more about what you heard. Doing that in a really curious way is important. Like, you can say that, right, in a way that's curious, and then go buy into that. So I like the, can we explore other options? So can we explore options, or I'd love to think that through a minute, like soften it a little bit. Can we explore other options, right? That's so nice. I respectfully disagree. So what I find is that people are afraid to use this kind of language because they are concerned they're going to get it wrong. And what I say to those people is, if you slow down and are thoughtful about your language, people actually respect that. They think, oh, Bob is trying to be respectful, and so he's slowing down and being thoughtful. And you can even back your language up. Catherine, do you mind just populating the rest of the slides so people can see what we did? So, just a few examples. You put them in here already, so this is not new to you. It's just the intent here is not just that we make this a theoretical exercise, but also that we make a practical exercise where we help people to do this, we encourage people to do this, and we give them the time to actually make it happen. Catherine, we've spoken about core values so much, but actually I think now is the time for core values. So
yeah, we're going to talk about them. Yeah, I hope that this is really helpful for you in terms of not just you personally today doing this little training exercise, but this is the type of stuff you can take back to your workforce and run some little trainings to get people thinking about, hey, if you're going to have those political conversations, here are some guidelines, making sure you're using collaborative language instead of that's not correct or I disagree, right? So another exercise that you can bring back to your team, and as we were talking about earlier, we have all these core values. Most organizations have them on their website. They may bring them up during recruiting new employees. And then in Bob's and my and many other consultants out there experience, that's where they kind of fall flat. And then that's the end of talking about the core values. Having core values that are talked about often and are kind of bleeding into all the nooks and crannies is going to be much better for you in something like managing these political conversations that may be happening. So these are some pretty common core values. So we can kind of pick one. Let's say one of your core values is collaboration. Well, back to what we were talking about earlier, how do you get people to really hone in on what exactly that means? This is another great tool for you to take back to your team. Just asking, essentially, what does it look like when someone's being collaborative? And what does it look like when someone is not? What's the behavior? So I know in HR, we talk a lot about core competencies, right? A core competency is written in such a way that it's observable behavior. So that's what we're essentially asking. So now you have some core competencies around your core values. So I'd love, just for purposes of a little practice on this, go ahead and type in a couple thoughts. What does collaborative look like? What does not being collaborative look like? What would someone observe if they're being collaborative? What would you observe in their behavior? And what if they're not? Let's get some definitions in there. Yes, thank you, Martha. Martha's pointing out that these ideas will work in things, all sorts of things other than just political or beyond political conversations. Making space, asking open-ended questions, interaction, bouncing ideas, taking others into account, body language. Yeah, I'm not being collaborative if I've got my arms folded and I'm staring you down. Having a growth mindset. One big clue is if they're using we or us. Yes, communicating. No predatory listening. Ooh, I hadn't heard that term before, but that's a good one. Predatory listening, as in I'm listening so that I can correct you or tell you you're wrong. Let's see, positive, encouraging differences. Yeah, love it. So great. So again, this is the kind of exercise that you can do with your team. We've got some other ideas here on the slides as well. So get your team, gather up your core values and get your team to have a conversation like this. Sit around and core value by core value. What does it look like when someone's doing this behavior or core value? And what does it look like when they're not? And then that can help you start to develop these guidelines that everybody agrees on, common ground around how we're going to have these conversations. Anything to add, Bob?
No.
Okay. And then we're also going to give you some tips for stepping in. So Bob, I'll let you take it from here.
That sounds great. I appreciate it. So how come I get this slide, Catherine? I don't know about fairness. Can we talk about that as a core value?
That'll never work, Bob.
Yeah. So, stepping in feels like for some of us, it is a core value to step in, right? So the question is, how do we do this? And what's the language that we use? So the two hints we have here around expressing feelings and asking questions, I think can be helpful. One thing I want to say here is language that I can use is absolutely not language that Catherine can use, and vice versa. So we can provide suggestions, but you have to make it your own. And I don't want to admit on how much I geek out about this sort of language, but what I actually have done is I've created a sheet for myself that says this language doesn't work and this is the collaborative language. And I keep it in my backpack. I'm digging myself further a hole. I keep it in my backpack, not because in a hard situation, I'm going to pull out that, but because sometimes I just want to look at to remind myself. And so I typically have a few go-tos that work. And that's how we express and how we ask questions and how we engage. So that's a suggestion that I will just put out there if anybody wants to join me in that. Let's jump forward. And
I love that. I want to share too on this.
Yes, please.
Another thing we're going to share with you is a list of 16 options that are in this same vein. And to Bob's point, choose one or two that works for you, and then you have that in your back pocket. So for me, I know asking a question is kind of my go-to, and and it's not really a question, it's more of tell me more. And then that's the way I show that I want to listen and understand, and then we can, have a conversation. But here's another great question. Did you know that, or did you consider that doing that could be harmful? Yeah. So maybe pick a few things to put in your back pocket that you have. And in the end, keeping in mind that bad behavior at work, be it gossip, harassment, discrimination, incivility, there's a lot of behaviors that aren't necessarily unlawful, and they're not going against policies per se, but they are a performance problem. And so in the end, leaders, managers, HR has a responsibility to address that bad behavior. So I want to give you a script that's going to change your life. You are going to love this. One of the problems that we get into as HR is we get focused on facts, right? And of course we do. I get a complaint that somebody's feeling it's a hostile work environment. The sirens go off and I push my magic button and in comes my investigator, right? To see if something unlawful happened and understand the facts like law and order. We have to pull out of that because things like incivility or having a heated political conversation is not unlawful. So we need to move away from being so focused on these boxes of lawful or unlawful and get more focused on culture and relationships. So this is a great script. The key to it is talking about perceptions. Jamie, it was brought to my attention by employees that you were badgering Sam about her political views in a staff meeting. They mentioned you were saying she's leftist radical. Can you tell me about this? So some coaching, right? And then that person's maybe going to say, no, I didn't do that. That's not what happened. And again, here's that's going to change your life. That last sentence, that perception has to change. So you could say, look, I wasn't in the meeting. I've heard some stories from other people. I wasn't there, but people perceived that you were insulting the other employee. That perception has to change. We cannot have people going around perceiving that you're insulting others. So, that is a key paradigm shift to focus on perceptions because they can't argue with that. They can argue to the blue in the face about what was said or not said. But if you are talking about just look, I don't know, I wasn't there even. I'm just telling you that this is the perception people have of you. And so let's work on that perception. So this hopefully will change your life. Penelope says that one of the things I've heard you say before is harassment and bullying, is that harassment is bullying that is legal. Yes, it is. Harassment and bullying are the same behaviors. The only difference is who you aim them at. So if I aim my bullying behaviors at only at one protected characteristic, then that makes it harassment and that's unlawful, right? So hopefully this script is really helpful for you. It's a great tool to teach your managers too. You don't need to get in a fact battle. It's just, here's the perception and we got to work on it. Amy says, I think the quick response would be, I can't control others' perceptions. How do you answer that? The answer, Amy, is yes, you can. You can control people's perceptions. And so when I coach individuals who engage in bullying, it's a deeper thing. I'm going in and interviewing people and sharing the feedback essentially. And often that is one of the pushbacks of like, well, that's their perception. That's not what happened. And then my answer to them is, well, I interviewed 15 people and they all had this perception. This isn't the feedback or one of two people. So you get to decide, do I want to own these perceptions of me so I can change them? Or am I going to continue to argue that that's not real? And you get to decide. But in order to work here, essentially, you have to have perceptions of you that are positive. I mean, I don't obviously say it quite like that, but hopefully that helps, Amy, is that, you can absolutely control perceptions of you by controlling your behavior and the way you interact with people. I don't know, Bob, I feel like you would have a
Well, actually, Catherine, I was just going to compliment you. And I'm so glad that you answered that question by just saying 3 words, yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Because I think what you did there is sometimes when we talk about collaborative language, people push back and they say, well, wait a minute, can't we just be direct? And the answer is absolutely, you can be direct. And you also need to be thoughtful about when the direct approach is correct and when, you want to kind of maybe lead with some curiosity. So Catherine, I thought that was a great example of kind of both pieces of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Let's see. I also wonder if starting out with the term badgering might put the person on the defensive. Yeah, you definitely, we're obviously writing up a script to make a point here, but yeah, being thoughtful about how you have this conversation with someone is important. The key takeaway is that you absolutely can help them make change and you can do that by holding them accountable to perceptions, even if they're not engaging in unlawful behavior. What if the response is they're being overly sensitive or they don't take feedback well? Then you can say, well, look, your responsibility is to figure out how they take feedback so that they can hear it. Paula says, Keith, can you come work for us? Keith, you're getting a lot of high fives today. I love it. Okay, so what's next? Bob, I'll let you share your thoughts on what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's pretty clear is no matter how people vote in November, there's going to be emotion. And so how do we deal with that? And I think the response is we deal with it by being proactive and actually can we communicate ahead of time? Like it doesn't matter. I mean, personally, of course, to most of us, it does matter who wins. But organizationally, what matters is that people feel safe. And so we want to be proactive about how we get people there, right? Because the truth is that no matter what, people are going to have resentment and they're going to feel bitter. But we can reduce the impact of this bitterness and the resentment on the workplace and on individuals who make up the workplace by being proactive in how we communicate and how we respond to it. So yes, I think this is a really nice list. And I think that this is where true leadership comes in, right? A little humility from the leader and a little bit of being proactive. I actually want to go into a little bit more depth on the next slide. So one of the suggestions we have first and foremost is, okay, if somebody's really struggling, send them home. I like this, right? Because what it says is I care for you, and I want to make sure that you're able to stay safe and those sorts of things. And I also feel that there are some people in workplaces who can go home because they can work from home, right? And other people who work in workplaces who they are not able to go home. If they go home, then X happens, right? And so oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the people who go home make more money and they look like me, and the people who have to stay make less money and they're a person of color. And so, yes, we want to be supportive. We also want to think through how does that support look for everybody, each and every person in the organization. The second bullet point here about using EAP or other benefits, so true. Also, I knew an organization once that what they said is doesn't matter who wins the election, but what we're going to do is we're having somebody from outside come in and they're going to facilitate a discussion after the election for anybody who wants to participate, not on the merits of who won, but on how are you feeling and what's the impact been on you, for the purpose of allowing employees to engage, to be able to connect across. As we, the sample scripts piece is, I'm a huge script person. I will script out many things. So I love that suggestion too. But let's jump forward to the next slide around what are we thinking about what managers must do? The communicate, don't stay silent. The message here is write these things in advance if you can as a leader. Best for you not to write them when you're feeling emotional. If you know something's coming, like the election, you can write and prepare and shop it around to people who you trust. So I think that's important. To me, when we haven't really spoken on this on leaders and their sources of power, but to me, when I think about this, when there's conflict and an external coming in like politics, I think the best way that I can make change and support people is to use my referent power, not so how people feel about me, the relationships that I've established. That's the kind of power we're relying on here as a manager. So I want to share just a couple more things, Catherine, and then can I pass it back to you?
For sure.
So when we look at the next slide around what everybody's responsible for, to me, it feels what are we all responsible for? Yes, of course, policies, but so much more. I just am so excited about the idea of being reflective. We are responsible for our own communication and our own behavior, right? And being respectful. Being respectful, not just how we define respectful, but being respectful based on what we know about how the team defines respectful so that we can engage in that way together. And then one more slide that I put up with a little bit of humor, right? And the reason I say humor, because Catherine, just create.
Just do that. It's easy.
Just do it, right? But it takes so much work, but really at its core, this is what we're saying, right? How do we create an environment of inclusion and respect? And how do we think about that every day or every week when we have 1,000 other things to do? But I do think at its core, that is the message. All right, Catherine, Want to wind it up for us?
I will. I'm going to give you some housekeeping items here. So the SHRM activity ID is here. So I'm going to pause here and take a swig and give you a chance to write that down. And then I have a couple other things for you, and then we'll call it a day. So get that number if you are looking for some continuing education credits. We have some things coming up. We've got getting leadership to listen to HR. I know that can be a difficult thing that difficult challenge that a lot of us in HR have, is getting our leadership to listen to our point of view and get them to put money into our ideas, because we know that the right ideas. So do join us on August 28th. Also wanted to share, if you're a member of LinkedIn Premium, we've got a ton of courses on LinkedIn. And we'll send all of this component out for you. But if you also wouldn't mind taking a little eval for us, that would be amazing. We would love to get some feedback from you. And thank you all for your participation. It was awesome. Loved the conversation. I'm so glad that you all enjoyed and were interactive with us. I'm seeing questions about HRCI. I do not have an HRCI number for you, Jennifer, but I know a lot of times you can just type in, here was the name of it, and it was an hour. And so you should still be able to get credit. It's just a little easier, obviously, if you have that number. Love these conversations. Bob, thank you so much for being here with me today. And of course, we're going to send you some resources, as we mentioned. If you want some training in your workplace from Bob and I, or just Bob, then
You're bailing on me already.
Throwing you under the bus all day. Definitely shoot an email at info@civilitypartners.com. We would of course love to help you through your challenges with political conversations or anything else. And yes, someone saying, can I get that survey link back? Thank you so much. So we'll leave that up for you. And I know Bob and I have a couple minutes if anybody wants to hang out and has any other questions. Everyone else, thank you. We'll give it a minute, see if anybody has anything else they want to add. So thanks, Bob, for putting the link in there.
Yeah, sure.
All right, I think we're golden. Thank you all. Thank you.